Tom Fox and Megan Dougherty explore Loki Season 2.
Megan, I'm not really sure where to begin with episode 1. I think we both had to watch it twice. What did you think of episode 1? How did you feel? Or not?
I have one major takeaway, and that is that OB, Ouroboros, must be protected at all costs. And if anything happens to him, I quit. I'm not watching anymore. He's the best. I like him a lot.
So clearly, for me as well, the top development in episode 1 was meeting Ouroboros, or as you said, OB. OB is one of those characters who lives in the bottom of the building. Think Q from James Bond and every variant of Q. And as I recall, when Mobius and Loki went down to see him, OB says, Mobius, it's great. I saw you
400 years ago.
That was his last visitor. Yeah, they don't let him out very often. But of course, he's the repository of all knowledge and Mr. Fix-It. And just a classic, almost trope in science fiction and fantasy, but perfect. Just perfect. Absolutely. And the other thing that struck me is more in episode 2 that we'll get to was the witty repartee and obvious character affection that Loki and Mobius have for each other now, but that OB was able to tie into that almost immediately. Episode 1. And it was just, when you get three-way banter like that, you need to sit down and watch and listen because it doesn't come very often. But
yeah,
somehow Loki is being sent back and forth through time in the TVA. And that's why they go down to the basement to meet OB. And he knows immediately what is happening. It's called time slipping. And once I got about the time they got to him, Megan and I realized this was great science fiction. And I don't want to say it borders on slapstick, but it's definitely comedic early on because Tom Hiddleston plays it for all it's worth. He is great with his facial expressions. He is Loki. It's Loki being time slipped. But the science fiction part of that I really enjoyed, and it only got better and stronger for me throughout this episode. So how did you tie into this as to what ended in season 1?
I have a little difficulty keeping straight what is what. Time travel science fiction has never been my absolute favorite. And I know there are visual cues indicating where in the timeline you are, like things look different in what is the past of the TVA than the present TVA. And that they're like, I just find it really hard to keep it all straight. So what I really did enjoy that they brought into it was the way that they've really made it kind of law of this particular universe that you can impact the present by acting in the past. And I think that was really important to do. I loved the conversation between Loki and OB in the past that was translating directly to OB and Mobius in the future. I thought that was a really elegant way of communicating that and helping them understand the time slippage. Yeah, it was all really interestingly done, but I found there was so much going on at different times that I found it really hard to follow. And I know that we had discovered at the end of the last season, we've got Kang, He Who Remains. Loki is sent back to the TVA, and then everything's different. And sometimes people know who he is, and sometimes they don't. And that's kind of, I watched and I enjoyed it, but I really don't know what's happening.
So I really like the idea of being sent to a different timeline in the future where they don't know you or they do know you and you've said something that indicates that. I just enjoyed all of that. But with OB, he, of course, not only diagnoses the problem, but he has a solution. And it
he developed
involves
with help from Loki in the past.
With Loki in the past. Exactly. And so that's where, to me, the science fiction really went to the next level up, which was where he was going. So Mobius has to intervene with somehow machine creation from OB, and he has to pick Loki off a timeline immediately as Loki prunes himself on this timeline.
Very high risk for everyone involved.
Very high risk. And it's limited by time because Mobius is outside the TVA and in a very hostile environment.
Mhm.
So, of course, this is when Loki is with Sylvie.
Yeah, and I think I'd been time slipped again, and
Yes. And he doesn't want to leave her.
no,
He's very taken with
he
her.
finally found his soulmate.
And he
Ripped
found his
away
soulmate.
horribly.
And I think that Sylvie is a Loki variant who's female,
Mhm.
which of course would make perfect sense because Loki would only love himself. Oh, for those who know Loki, you know that's too true as well. And so we got all that going on. And the story as it progresses, to me, just got more intense and better in a way that I was not expecting, because the first half of this episode with a time slipping in it and being as befuddled as you were in watching episode 1, I was thinking this was moving towards some sort of comedic ending, and that was not it at all.
It's very serious.
Very serious. Did you have any thoughts on that part of the episode?
It was something that I thought was interesting were some of the new characters that were introduced. So the people in the war room, General Dax, I believe, taking this very seriously. And I found it hard to figure out who was, I guess, acting genuinely and who had what information about what was going on, or if anyone had any information about what was going on. I'm sorry, I've got no idea. I really thought watching the last season again would help me get less confused about this one. It did not.
The bottom line is we have multiple timelines created by the death, and that these multiple timelines, of course, are creating multiple variations for the multiverse. And Lokis are literally across the galaxy, both in time and space. A lot going on with that. The generals, they begin the debate, which continues a little bit in episode 2, which is, if we prune all of those timelines, how many billions of people do we kill? And is that what our legacy is going to be? So I thought that was an interesting discussion as well.
It is a really interesting discussion. That's one of the things I thought about was, is a variant real? Is it? Yeah, I thought it was just an interesting kind of way to play with what is the moral fallout of maintaining the universe if you have to kill a bunch of people to do it. I don't know. I don't know if it's clear what the outcome of not doing anything would be.
Yes. So at the end, we have Mobius is able to save Loki, and then OB is able, or I guess Loki, in the way he is slingshotted back to the present of this episode, hits Mobius, knocks him back inside the TVA, and that saves him from his own expert from the non-breathable atmosphere that they're in. And the
Really nice moment.
A really nice moment. So I guess for our listeners who have not seen this episode, I will just end by saying this really was some of the best science fiction I'd seen. And yes, you may be a little confused, but once you realize Loki is traveling through time, it does not appear that he is doing this of his own free will, that he's being shot back and forth or time slipped. I just love those stories. And if you are interested in time travel at all, or a story about time travel, I don't think you can do much better than episode 1 of Loki season 2.
And it is beautiful, and it is surprisingly funny. I think all of the characters have really come into their own. And as you mentioned, Tom, their chemistry together is marvelous, and they're all just independently really funny.
I think this is probably a good way, or a good place for us to end our review of episode 1. So I am Tom Fox.
And I'm Megan Dougherty.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to the award-winning Because That's What Heroes Do. I hope you will join Megan and I again as we explore episode 2 in our next episode of this podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. Because That's What Heroes Do is a production of the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network.